Now, after understanding the concept of components, going forward, we'll be looking everything in a practical way. Okay, so basically, how do you start writing your React.js code? So you get the HTML and CSS from other developers, like you are a front-end developer now, so you get the UI and elements like HTML and CSS from other team, or maybe you can build your own HTML and CSS. So you convert them into your React component. So whatever we are discussing so far, right? So we'll follow the same process in understanding rest all concepts of React.js, like props, state, events, and etc. So in that process, I have picked up. So currently our basic application would look something like this with the hello world. So let me start it. So it is as simple as a simple hello world. So it contains one main component and index.js. Okay. Now we'll build by learning. So we'll learn by building a good or decent to do applications or the note taking application. Okay, so we'll add, currently this is a static HTML and CSS page .html file, right? So we'll convert it into React, how to split into components, and how you can add CSS, how you can add class names, how you can define props, how you can add state, how you can bring life to this, like when I click on this, when I click on this, when I click on this, how the filtering will happen, everything, right? So let's learn by building the project. Okay, so right now I have the HTML file with me, right? So I have the HTML file, the big HTML file which we have just seen. So most of the times you get the HTML from the other developers who are expert in UI UX, like who are very good at CSS and HTML. You pick it up and now you start converting it into React components. Okay, so very simple, guys. So first you take all the body element. Okay, so you take all the body elements. So this is the main HTML code of your project, and here you have the CSS styling inside the style tags. Okay, so you pick it up, you pick the entire body tag, right? And I'll create a new folder over here and I'll call it as note taking app. Okay, so I created a new folder, and inside this I'll create the file component.js. So here I'll define my note taking component. Okay, so in the first we'll start this way. First we'll take the HTML, then split it into components, then go on, like add props, add state, add events, and make it a complete working application. Okay, so function note taking. So first I'm writing it as a functional component. As of now, I'm not really sure if this has any state or not, right? So function, and this will return the JSX, right? So function note taking, and this will return the JSX. Okay, so I'm exporting this, export default note taking. Now where do I import this? I'll import it in my main component. Okay, so how do I import it? Import note taking. Yeah, automatically it came because of the plugins. You can install all the React.js plugin, right? Now I'll simply render or return the note taking app. Okay, but one thing which you need to remember is that all the attributes like class or anything, ID, anything in the JSX, it should follow the camel case. So class is now replaced, because you can already observe that class is also another reserved keyword in React.js, right? You can define a class-based component, so it will become contradict. So hence, all classes should be replaced with class name. Okay, and you need to add the CSS for it. So you go and copy the CSS from the HTML. Okay, so with the style tags first, and create another file, styles.css. Okay, that's it. So we don't need this style tags anymore because it's in a separate file altogether, not as part of head element. And yeah, so how do you import the CSS into any React.js file? Simple. Import the file name. So CSS will now be automatically applied to all the class. So class to do app stack large. So this we might find this somewhere. To do app, yeah, to do app, right? So this class styles will be automatically applied over here. And if I now refresh my web page, I should see the same thing. Yes. So now I am able to see the same HTML and CSS which I have copied in my React.js application. So if you're not believing it, I'll simply remove this and I'll say div hello world. Okay. Now I see the hello world, right? So I just converted my HTML and CSS file directly into the React component, okay, by pasting enter. But as I said, having such a big component is not at all good because you need to separate out the contents, and now we'll understand how we can separate out the different contents. Okay, but before that, let me walk you through what HTML code is actually doing. Okay, so here we have the h1 tag which gives the title of the page, and we can rename it to code sapiens note taking application. Okay, and then we have a form element. So React.js supports all of the HTML tags which are present, so you can directly import the form tag over here. So the form which has one input field, okay, form which has one input field and a submit button, form which has one input field and a submit button. Okay, so this is one section of the page, and then we have the other section which is like a tabs which allows us to filter. So later we can filter by clicking on this. So if I want to see all the tasks, and if I want to see only the active task, and if I want to see only the completed task, in that way I can split it out. So this is another section in my page which says filters, right? And I have another section, another small section which is the UL element, right? So this is the actual component, or this is the actual section where I am looping through all the tasks, right? So currently it is a static one, so it has static list elements, but technically it should be a dynamic one. So if user enters the data and clicks on add, then it should add to the form, right? So we'll add all of those functionalities, but first we'll understand how to split this particular component. I mean, this is a large component, right? So how do I split this? Okay, so let me do that. First, I'll find out, okay, this is a form element and it needs to be handled. So when the user is clicking on the button, I need to save the data somewhere and pass it to the below values, right? So first I'll split it out, the form component function, and going forward I'll write all the class components. Okay, input form component, okay, extends react dot component. Okay, it should have a render method, right? So the main focus right now is to split this big component into smaller components so that the separation of concerns happen and you can deal with them independently. Return this. So now the input form component is having only this particular of HTML content, and which later can deal with the data entered in the input field should be passed down to the rest all components, and we'll see all of that. But first the splitting, right? And then I'll split the filters. Okay, so because when I click on the filters and filtering should happen, so all it means that particular section has some meaningful impact on the web page. So when a user performs any action, right? So I'll split it into filter component, class filter component, extends react.component. Okay, so return. Now, what is the mistake? You need to first call the render function, and inside the render, you will return the JSX, right? So we have filter component, then we have input form component, and the last thing which we have is the list component, which actually displaces the to-do list, right? So nodes, all the nodes. So node list component. Okay, so react dot component render, right? So now this will return the list. Okay, so again, now the issue here is that you are trying to return two elements from a single component, which React doesn't allow. Now what do? I simply wrap it inside the React fragment so that it returns a single element. That's it, right? So now I have divided my entire component into three components, that is input form component, filter component, and node list component. And finally, I'm left with this content over here. So I can simply render all of those. So if you now look in the UI, I just have the title, right? Code Sapiens Node application. So I will add my more components using the component composition concept. Input form component, right? So I added this. Now I see the input form component. Similarly, I will add filter component. Now I can see my filters coming up, and then I have the node list component. Okay, so with this, my entire web page is now divided into three components, but finally exporting only a single component from here, that is a function component, and it is the main component which wraps all of this. So this becomes the parent of all of this. So parent means that when you are wrapping a component inside another, like the node taking component is wrapping all of these, right? So it means node taking application is the parent component of input, filter, and node list. Okay, so this is one important thing. So this is how you split the component. I mean, there is no definite way of saying it, but usually I have segregated it in this form. So input form component will now only deal with adding the data. So it should take the data from the user and it will add, that's it. Similarly, filter list component will take the filters applied by the user and it passes down. So it basically, when the user clicks on the button, it understands, okay, what the user is clicking, and based on that, it filters the data. Similarly, the node list. So the purpose of the node list component is only to display whatever data is passed down to it in the form of list. Okay, and we have other elements as well over here. So if you look at the input list, rest all things are pretty clean. In the input form component, it is very cool. Only one input element and one button. You click on it, you need to do some action. And the filter list component is also cool. So you click on a button and it almost has a similar kind of functionality, right? But the node list component looks like it can also be divided further, right? So see, the node list component has a checklist and two buttons, right? So the each list element has again one more. Again, one input field, which is a checkbox, and another div element, which is a combination of two buttons, wherein you can edit and you can delete, right? So I feel that I can even divide this particular component into further more, right? Because it is doing a lot more inside this. So in the list component, I have a lot more other functionalities which I have to deal with, like edit and delete. Edit should give me an option to edit the content, all of this, right? So what I'll do is I'll create another component, that is class node list element component extends react.component. So that is how I decide. How am I deciding now? That the list elements are doing lot more things, whereas my note list component should ideally be only looping through the data and displayed. That's it. It shouldn't care about anything. But inside the list note list component, there are other elements which are doing lot more things, right? So on that basis, I am splitting the note list component into furthermore render, and I'll pick it up this element, right? I'll pick up this element and I'll say return the list element. Okay, so now what I have to do technically, so I don't need this anymore because I have separated it out. Now it will be node list element component. So I should have 3 of the same right now because I don't have the dynamic data. So now if you see how many number of components have we divided from the HTML page. First is the header component. Second, you have the input field component. Then you have the filters component. And then you have the list component. And even inside the list, you have 3 children, right? So if you now look at the hierarchy, what is the hierarchy, guys? Note taking is the parent, and inside this you have 3: input and filter and note list, right? Again, note list has note list element component. So note taking is the highest parent element. Then inside that you have 3 subchildren, and inside subchildren again you have another children, right? So this way. So note list has another children. So this is how you decide. So if you feel even you want to divide this particular again into multiple components, then you can do it. No issue. So you can say this as an actions. Okay, so what I can do is class node list element actions extends react.component. So nobody can actually say how can you split the components in a better way, right? So now I found out that okay, even note list element can be further divided in this fashion. Like what are the different actions which I can perform? Like edit is an action, delete is an action. So maybe edit shows me a pop-up where I can edit the content, and delete asks me, okay, do confirmation, do you want me to delete or not, right? Or you can make it mark it as complete or anything, right? In that fashion, you can divide it into furthermore like this: note list action, note list element actions. And how do I render that? Like this. Okay, now even now you see the same thing because you are just splitting down the component so that you get the separation of concerns, and now you can handle the list element actions in their own way, right? So if you find any other splitting possible, you can do that. And I can see that the button over here, which is show task action, is active complete. So filter value is all active and completed, right? So you can split the components in any fashion, but it should make some meaning. Don't split a button component, header component, and all of that. If it really makes some sense to you and you have some actions associated with it, then it is a very good idea to split the components.